Good morning. It's great to see you here this morning. Thanks for making People of Hope part of your day today, especially as we kind of enter into this fall season of kind of trying some different things out here at People of Hope. So I'm glad to see you guys all made it to the 9 a.m. start time of our worship service. If there's folks who walk in while I'm chatting, make sure to stare at them and make them feel as uncomfortable as possible. No, just welcome them in and remind them that we are starting worship at 9 o'clock in the morning. Last night, Karen and I were kind of wondering what to do with our evening. We had spent the day running errands. Tucker had spent the day in La Crosse, mountain biking with his mountain bike team. We had gotten home, picked up Tucker from practice, and I did what I love to do on Saturday afternoons, took a little nap. And while I was napping, Karen and Tucker went and ran some more errands, and they got home, and we cooked dinner, and we sat down, and dinner was ready, and Karen and I looked at each other and we said, well, what are we going to do now? And we decided to watch a movie together. Okay, and the movie we watched last night was called The Mule. How many of you have seen The Mule? Now, I'm not going to talk about the content of The Mule so much. Just know that it involves Clint Eastwood, a truck, illegal narcotics, sex, and violence. So it's a nice, wholesome family movie. Anyway, as we were watching The Mule last night, I kept thinking about today's gospel text, which sounds very, very weird to those who have watched the movie. But essentially the point of the movie is that Clint Eastwood has been this business person for most of his life, and for most of his life, he has chosen to be successful in business rather than spending time with his family. And this has caused his family to kind of reject him. He's so involved in his business that he actually skipped one of his daughter's weddings to go be with his business pals, right? Now, Clint Eastwood, pretty early in the story, or in the movie, loses his business. And he tries to go back to be with his family who want nothing to do with him. So in his mind, he figures he has to do something to get back in their good graces. Now, I'm not going to tell you what he does, but know that it's highly illegal. And towards the last third of the movie, he finds out that his wife, who he has loved his entire life, who is now his ex-wife, is starting to die. And Clint Eastwood makes the choice at that moment to stop doing the illegal thing that he is doing, at great cost to him, to spend time with his dying spouse. Okay? His spouse dies, he re-engages with the illegal behavior that he is supposed to be doing, and is arrested. And one of the last scenes of the entire movie is Clint Eastwood sitting in a courtroom where a judge is handing out a verdict about his illegal activity. He admits that he's guilty, and he stands up and he hugs his family. This family who had been away from for all these years, and they embrace. And he says to his daughter, the same daughter whose wedding he skipped out, that the money that he had earned doing this illegal stuff, he could buy anything that he wanted to buy. But the only thing he couldn't buy was more time. Okay? Now, I was thinking about this movie and in regards to what Jesus is sharing with us today. Now, Jesus is going around in the Gospel of Luke teaching people about what it means to be a disciple, what it means to be a follower of his. In next week's reading, or a reading coming up, he's going to commend people to be salt of the earth. Last week you heard from Pastor Corinna a little bit more about what Jesus is saying, but this week we're confronted with this lesson from Jesus, who looks out at this group of people who have been following him around and says, unless you hate your mother, father, brother, sister, you cannot be followers of me. Unless you sell everything that you have, you can't be a follower of me. Unless you do this stuff that to us sounds really, really harsh, you can't be a follower of me. And I was thinking about this as watching the movie last night, because I think that the Clint Eastwood character learned the lesson that Jesus is trying to tell the followers. You see, in this passage, Jesus uses the word hate, which causes many of us who like to think of Jesus as this loving and shepherding person a little bit of tension, right? Because we don't like to hear Jesus talk about hating anything. But it's important to understand the usage of the word hate here. If you look at the Greek, the word used for hate is called missio. Okay? And the translation of missio isn't the absence of love. It is loving something more than something else. So if you understand that word as what Jesus is saying, he's saying, brother and sister, you cannot love your family more than you love me. Which still sounds kind of harsh. Until you understand why love of family was so important in the time that Jesus lived. Love of family was so important. To be a member of a family was so important because that's how you got your social status in the society. If you came from an important family, all of a sudden you were important. Not because of anything you did or anything you said or because of how you lived your life, simply because you were born at the right time in the right place to the right parents. And Jesus, in the time of Jesus, there were people who abused kind of this family privilege, right? Who understood that they were born into this life of luxury, this life of social importance, that they were the important person. So no way were they going to disassociate. No way were they going to associate themselves with a less than person, because that would diminish their importance. All right. So what Jesus is saying then to his followers is, you cannot love your self-importance more than you love me. You cannot love yourself, the things you have, your social standing, your position in life more than you love me. You cannot let these things control yourself or the way that you interact with the world. Because if you are self-centered and self-important, you're going to do things that only serve you, and you don't care about how your actions might affect your brother and sister, or how your actions might continue systems of oppression in the world. You can't do that anymore. That can't be more important than following me. Now, if I would have warned Tucker before the service, I would have had him go back to that prayer of confession that we just prayed so long ago. And you can try to go back there, Tucker. If you want to, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay, hold on. Look at that paragraph at the bottom. We do not hear the cries of the poor, the abused, the oppressed. We close our ears to learning from others, to listening to voices of challenge or conflict. What we are praying there is that God, we are praying that we are more important than anyone else. We are recognizing that we have put ourselves in more important places than anyone else. And because we're so important, we don't have to pay attention to those who are poor, who are experiencing abused, or who are oppressed, right? Click the next one, Tucker. We're so important that we remain silent in the face of destruction, devastation, and sin. We are so important, we're so important, that we don't speak on behalf of those who suffer, who have no voice. You see, every week, thanks to her, you see, every week when we gather here for worship, we pray these prayers, and we recognize that sin is pervasive. Sin is part of our humanness, right? And Jesus is challenging Jesus' followers here to try to break these cycles of sin by recognizing that identity isn't based on the self. Identity is based on the love of God. That when we see each other, what's more important than to try to figure out if I'm more important than you is to recognize that you are also a child of God. And that you're important. And that you have value just for being you. See, what Jesus is saying is that there is a big cost to being a follower of Christ. The cost is breaking down those societal structures that tell us that we have to do everything that we can to gain power and authority and accumulate wealth and all these things. But the cost of following Jesus is to align ourselves with those who are suffering, who are experiencing poverty and hurt in our world. To align ourselves with those folks and to use the resources that God has given to us, our time, our talent, and treasures, so that those people don't have to experience that oppression anymore. Jesus is essentially saying, give all that stuff that you think is important, give it away. Don't focus on it. Instead, focus on me and the love I have for you and the love I have for the world. Brothers and sisters in Christ, as we begin a new programmatic year here at People of Hope, a year filled with the start of Sunday school and next week the start of our adult learning times, as we begin again with confirmation classes and other studies, may we be people who aren't afraid to be disciples of Jesus, no matter the cost. May we realize that Jesus is leading us into the practice of discipleship. That it's not just enough to say that we believe if we don't put actions with our belief. May we continue in the struggle to be disciples together, and may we realize that when we fall short of God's ideal for us, that Jesus still loves us. Because nothing is more important to God than all of us. Thanks be to God. Amen.